You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
The term sustainability has become the catch-all for seemingly everything. Recycling, energy, EVs, CSR, packaging, labor, culture. How do you know which way to go? Well, today's guest is going to help us navigate that. Welcome to Convenience Matters. I'm Carolyn Schnare with NACS.
And I'm Chris Blasinsky with NACS.
And today we're joined by Scott Case, owner of Responsible Sourcing Solutions. And we're going to talk about how should we navigate this sustainability landscape? How making sustainability convenient? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And how do we get started? So many questions and 20 minutes to do it all.
So little time.
No worries. You guys are experts.
Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
nice
for joining
to
us. So we have been talking about sustainability for the better part of what? 10, 20 years, Chris?
10 years plus.
Very good.
We could pull out a NACS magazine.
We started when I was 5.
And probably before that. But I mean, it's become bigger in the last few years, even few months. I mean, even just in the past, I don't know, year or so, we've talked about everything from straws to you name it, plastic bags,
single-use
plastics, recycling, packaging, and
energy
it's
efficiency.
All
and there's
the things.
this girl named Greta running around talking about stuff. So
it's the junk drawer, right?
Exactly.
It's all the things.
Everything is sustainability.
But how can we, to that end, how do you define sustainability?
Geez.
There's the $1 million
there's
question.
the $1 million question. So it really depends on the audience that we're speaking in front of. But when you look at it from the convenience sector, kind of the big 3 buckets probably still apply, which is the people component. How are you treating your employees and your customers? So there's the people component. There's the planet component. What are the environmental impacts of your activities? And then there's the prosperity component. So it's the profits for the business owner and prosperity for the local communities where the convenience stores are operating.
The 3 Ps.
The 3 Ps.
So with that, strategic versus reactive efforts, I know that's something we've talked about a lot. So how do we tackle that? Is it a knee-jerk thing? Should we wait for people to tell us what to do?
Well, that's the fun part, and that's been a part of the conversation at the NACS show, actually. So there's kind of a continuum, if you will, from reactive sustainability to strategic sustainability. The reactive sustainability, there's all sorts of kind of famous stories, environmentalists protesting the way McDonald's wrapped their hamburgers, and they were literally protesting outside of the stores and chaining themselves to stores and yelling and screaming. And so McDonald's did the smart thing and they made adjustments to meet the consumer demand. But that was a very reactive approach. Then there's kind of the strategic approach where you actually identify opportunities to do something that's really, really good for your business, that's really good for the community, that's going to make money, and that has a cool green halo or a sustainability halo connected with it.
Well, I mean, that's, and like you said, the legislative side of things too.
There's always that legislative side, and so the smart industries get ahead of sustainability trends before they become legal imperatives. So you can actually watch these kinds of things unfolding and actually take proactive steps so that the problem the legislation is trying to address actually goes away or never becomes as bad as they think it's going to be.
I think it's interesting, too, in the last, we've met you over 10 years ago, and that was, our industry was kind of dipping its toes in the topic, and I think a lot of it was around energy management and waste and stuff like that, and it's evolved in 10 years. I mean, the definition of sustainability, what we heard our chairman, Frank Gleason, say this morning, it means so many things to so many different people, and it can be hard for a retailer to kind of, wrap their head around what they need to do. But there is that strategic business decision of what sustainability means to them and how they're going to drive their company in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's happened in the sustainability world, and I guess I've been playing in it since the early 90s, and back then if you could spell the word sustainability, you were an expert.
I still can't spell it.
But what we've seen is kind of trends. They ebb and flow. Interest in the issue kind of comes and goes. And it comes and goes in different sectors at different times. But everybody seems to kind of follow the same general paths, which is they start with some sort of conservation approach, which is all about conserving energy and conserving resources. So that's always kind of an early phase. And then different industries get hit with different challenges at different times. So right now, the convenience sector is looking at food waste issues. You're looking at packaging issues. You're looking at single-use plastics. And all of those have become very, very hot among consumers right now. So all of a sudden, you have CEOs particularly interested in what's this sustainability thing? Meanwhile, there are people who have been in the operations for years who are saying, look, the stores are significantly more energy efficient. The refrigerated cases are a lot more energy efficient. We've cut our electricity use. We've cut our electric bills. That's also part of sustainability. But it's only kind of whatever is the hot topic at a time that seems to get the CEO's attention. But they're all connected. And if you thread all of those different issues with the single strategy, that's where the kind of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow can be.
Right. But it's also important within that strategy that I think you've said this before, like they can't just be, little buckets of things like, okay, well, we'll do something about plastic and then we'll be good.
Exactly. So the challenge with anything related to sustainability is once you've tackled one issue, consumers, at least a certain segment of your consumer, roughly 10% of kind of the hardcore green people, or up to about 40% of the light green people, they expect you to do more. So they might see you put out the recycle bins to address a litter problem, and that's great. Then they want to know, why aren't you recycling in store? What are you doing with food waste? Or
your packaging.
Or your packaging.
Why aren't you composting?
Yeah. Or, oh my gosh, I have to drink this slushy with a straw. That's, So there's all sorts of kind of issues that kind of bubble up. And so the organizations that look at these things strategically understand how all those different issues connect. And they understand that from a financial perspective, but they also understand it from a consumer messaging and marketing perspective.
I was going to say the prosperity, which you mentioned was one of the 3 Ps. If it's going to cost a lot of money, it's not necessarily something that anyone really, any CEO in the world is going to want to put in there. But there is also the consumer support. Now you've got loyalty. So, where's the trade-off? What is the cost, really? I think you've got to continue to look at in terms of...
And I love that you asked that question. Everyone always asks that question. What about the cost? What about the cost?
How much is it going to cost me?
But this is the same industry that all of a sudden I can get fresh food and fresh produce and organic treats, all of which cost more, right? So it's not really about the cost. It's about meeting the needs of the customer and meeting the needs of your employees. So one of the other kind of hidden ROI elements of sustainability is better employee engagement. So folks actually can be excited to be working at one retailer over another because this retailer cares more about the community, cares more about the environment, cares more about them as an employee. So that's another kind of key piece of sustainability is keeping the employees happy as well as the customers.
It's a differentiator. It makes you that much different than your almost similar customer in the other corner.
It's absolutely a differentiator.
Competitor, sorry.
But if nobody knows you're doing it,
that's
if the tree falls in the forest.
and that's one of the biggest challenges. And I think it seems particularly big in the convenience sector because folks tend to be afraid to talk about sustainability because there's this whole oil thing connected with your sector.
Right.
Oh, that.
Yeah, But that actually, to be honest with you, gives you even more of a reason to talk about it. Because one of the presenters at the NACS show was talking about the transition to electric vehicles. And that's going to be this huge revolutionary kind of thing that affects this industry. But you can start getting ready for that kind of thing now. And it might not make financial sense to put in, electric vehicle chargers or something like that. But in some sectors, in New Jersey, for example, it makes perfect sense to go solar. And there's this kind of fascinating thing that happens with consumers who feel good about filling up their car with gasoline in a solar-powered convenience store. So it gives people permission to do something that others think is bad, like this whole gasoline carbon thing. But if you can do it in a solar-powered place, or you can do it in a place that's recycling or that's tackling single-use plastics, all of a sudden you have, the feeling of, it's not so bad. This particular retailer cares, and they know I'm struggling to be more sustainable, and they are helping me do it, take one step at a time.
Well, I mean, it's. I've heard the word social license a lot as it applies to, more like plastics. Plastics. I heard a term that plastics have lost their social license in a way that they're not as accepted. Or you're drinking that plastic water bottle there, but you know what? You need it. You need it for food safety. You need to have things packaged well or wrapped well, or just for convenience. Because usually you don't want to walk out with your hot dog in your hand, and then you drop it on your pants or something in the car while driving. So you need these things, but I think retailers, especially in that regard, are certainly facing some challenges.
Enormous challenges, and I think that's one of the really interesting, the big two hottest trends for people, consumers interested in environmental issues right now are ocean plastics and global warming. And global warming seems big, huge, overwhelming. What in the world can they possibly do about it? But you know what? I can skip a straw. And so that gives them the feeling that they're actually doing something about it. And so single-use plastics becomes a sole focus. But when you really ask consumers, are they willing to trade off product safety or product convenience, you really start to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe sometimes the plastics aren't quite so bad. But here's the strategic opportunity. There are alternatives to plastics. The challenge is they are not yet widely available and they're still more expensive. But if an industry gets together and says, as an industry, we want to move in this direction, you have the opportunity to combine purchasing power or to combine consumer messaging so that you can actually move things in a slightly different direction. Take those issues off the plate for the consumer and for the retailer.
Right. But it's only single use if it's not recycled.
Exactly. So recycling is a key piece of it, but it's not the only piece of it. So
a key visible piece of it, too.
It's a key visible piece of it. So obviously recycling is a key component, but there are some models now that are going into reuse. We see it most frequently in my local convenience stores. I have reusable mugs. So there's a mug that sits in my car that doesn't get as washed as frequently as it should.
Food safety.
Food safety. But I can walk in and I can refill my mug and I get a discount. So there's brand loyalty there, there's convenience for me, and there's a sustainability story that goes along with it.
Well, and you wouldn't take that same cup into a competitor, not that retailer. You don't usually. I'll go outside of our industry. You get one at McDonald's. You're not going to take it into Burger King and go get it filled.
Well, not that I never have, but I'm a creature like most people. I'm a creature of habit, right? So my commute, I pass the same convenience store, and I stop and park in the same parking spot, and I get the same flavored coffee. And but if I'm on the road traveling down, I've been known to bring an off-brand coffee mug into a competing store.
That's okay. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Right?
Those
are the 3 R's. You've got the 3 P's. I don't remember who came out with it. It was Jack Johnson sang a song about it, but I think they're older than Jack Johnson.
It predates Jack Johnson, but thank you very much because now I have that song stuck in my head.
I do too.
So
well, that'll be our theme song closing out.
I don't know it,
right?
so don't start.
Okay.
It's on my phone, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure Siri's listening. She's probably going to play it in a minute.
Well, you're kind of talking a little bit about the circular economy in a sense too, where a lot of stuff is going into the system and then being kept in the system instead of the linear economy where it's like we make it, we use it, we toss it out.
Exactly. And so it's fun is all of a sudden circular economy has kind of become the green term du jour.
It's been around for a while.
It has. It's kind of
it's
a 1970 concept. Well, Chris was doing a great job, right?
Yeah.
So the traditional economy, right, is make, take, you pull something out of the ground, you turn it into something, you use it, you throw it away. So it's this linear system from the time you mine it to using it to you throw it in the ground, which is kind of one stream, one-way street. The circular economy tries to close that loop. So at the end, rather than throwing something away, you're actually reusing it or recycling it, turning it into something new that you can use again and again and again. So that concept is kind of picked back up, and all of a sudden people are beginning to understand the value of that circular economy. But there's actually a step beyond that folks outside of this industry sector are looking at, which is the restorative economy. So they're actually trying to make products that generate a useful product, they generate profits, they generate prosperity, but they also generate environmental benefits. So there's some manufacturers that are actually, going carbon negative, meaning they're actually pulling carbon out of the economy instead of adding to it.
What kind of products are they?
So there's a
for
couple
example?
manufacturers. There's the most famous one, I guess, is a carpet manufacturer for covering. But there are others that are really beginning to explore these concepts.
Like you can be like uniforms and shirts out of a
Uniforms
bottle.
and shirts, and so if you are making clothes out of old recycled bottles and things like that, polyester, and a solar powered factory and electric vehicles delivering it and stuff like that, you can start to make the claim that you're actually producing environmental benefits rather than environmental negatives. So you're eliminating the adverse environmental externalities.
Well, I'm not necessarily like advocating for it, but I think you could bring that into a company. So say you take on recycling and you're collecting out at the pump or inside, and they're recycling the bottles, and they might not come from the same bottles, but now you have a bench made from recycled plastic. Your uniforms are made from recycled materials. I know those manufacturers are out there, but then you can really show and live that circular economy to your customers.
Absolutely.
And then tell them about it.
Well,
like
and
Chris
that's
said.
the key. But what I don't get about this sector, right? The convenience sector allows the vendors, the suppliers, to do that and tell those stories. So there are some really big, let's call them carbonated soda beverage companies who will be very, very vocal about the fact they're taking their recycled bottles and turning them into T-shirts. Mm-hmm. Why aren't the convenience stores, the retailers, actually doing that kind of thing as well?
Yeah.
To kind of tie that message back. Because if those bottles are being recycled and turned into, branded convenience retail T-shirts, that means it's not going into my local dump. That means it's, actually helping keep my local community clean.
And some of those same vendors are making their bottles out of, or have commitments to make their bottles out of a certain percentage of plant-based or recycled material and things like that. I mean, take credit for that. Like, hey, we have this whole cooler full of this recycled.
I can buy running shoes made out of a plastic bottle.
Exactly. So
or
people are closing the
bottles,
loop on all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But why the convenience sector isn't taking more credit for making it possible for consumers to do that? It's just a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit too about, the consumer engagement piece and trying to get consumers more involved with what folks are doing, and convenience retail as well. So that seems to be a little bit of a gap that we've heard too, was there's only so much you can do. Like, you can lead the horse to the water, but the water, they have to actually, drink it.
The Kool-Aid.
Drink the Kool-Aid. Dang it.
We're like
Drink
the same
it.
brain sometimes.
Drink the Kool-Aid.
So yes, but it goes two ways, actually. So one of the challenges is that the retailers aren't telling the story particularly effectively. Consumers can't respond positively to a story that you're not telling. And then the other piece is actually a threat. If you really pay attention in the kind of the dark green recesses of the internet, there are actually environmentalists who are blaming convenience as the biggest environmental threat on the planet. And they are beginning to demonize convenience as the problem.
But not convenience stores necessarily.
concept
just
of convenience.
The concept of convenience.
Right.
And that could be a potential threat to a sector that prides itself on convenience. Convenience is wonderful
your name.
benefits,
Yeah.
right?
It's in
We
your
all
name right
need
there.
it.
Right.
But if the retail side, the convenience retail sector is not telling the positive convenience stories, you're leaving open the opportunity for others to tell that story for you. And they might not always be telling it in a way you would want it to.
And then your messaging becomes defensive.
Correct. So again, that comes back to some of the conversation from the beginning, is what's the difference between a reactive strategy, a reactive approach, and a strategic approach. So when you see these kinds of things beginning to bubble up, it's identifying a potential threat, but it's also creating an opportunity for NACS and all of NACS members.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. And I think you're going to help us with some work later on today and in the future. I hope that can really help put our minds around this, our NACS brains, and what we can do to help our retailers. So more to come on that in the near future. And we do have some resources out there. Might as well give a quick plug.
Absolutely.
We have a couple of NACS resources. We've got the value of can and bottle recycling. So we have that toolkit, let you know how to do that. We have our trash management and litter management, the guide to managing and trash and litter.
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. We made it with Keep America Beautiful. Anyway, it's all on our website, convenience.org. But I guess before I go, what is your take on like mega trends, like ban the straw, or we've already talked a little bit about plastic, things like that, like obviously reactive. But what should a retailer do? You've got a protest out front. Your McDonald's, they want you to change your wrappers. You want to do things like that. What do you ignore it? What do you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of big, huge trends. One is just looking at consumer interest in these things. And consumer interest continues to climb in environmental issues, more sustainable lifestyles, all that kind of stuff. So all of the trends point to that becoming a bigger and bigger issue, both for the customer and for the employee. So that's one big trend. Another huge trend is transparency, either voluntary transparency or forced transparency. So a lot of larger companies are beginning to publish CSR reports, corporate social responsibility reports, and promoting all of the really good things that they're doing. But at the same time, with social media and cameras on our phones and all that kind of stuff, anybody with a Twitter account standing outside your retail establishment looking at an overflowing trash can create an environmental disaster story for you. So transparency can cut both ways. Those are the two of the big ones. And then I guess the third big issue, I guess, would be just the business community really beginning to lock in as that this is an opportunity to save money, to make money, to build brands, to build long-term customer relationships.
Well, you've certainly you've opened our eyes to some new things, some easy things we can do. You even mentioned whether it's transparency, getting a CSR report. You just put it on your website.
Absolutely.
Make a sign out of paper and stick it on your window. I mean, just recycle it when you're done with it, right?
Recycle paper, of
But
course.
it's just telling your story is a great place
So
to
important,
start.
yeah.
And easy.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to tell the story. No one is doing it perfectly. No one expects you to be doing it perfectly.
Don't let somebody else tell the story for you.
Exactly.
If you're not telling the story, someone else will tell it for you.
And you're not going to like it.
So, Scott, where can we find out more about you?
LinkedIn is a good place to find me. So there's only one Scott with one T
Scott
out
with
there.
one T
Scott
case.
with one T case.
Scott
It's
with
more
one T.
environmentally friendly, right? More
That's
resource efficient.
That's true.
So,
well, this has been great. We've talked about people, planet, prosperity, the 3 Ps, the 3 Rs. This has been fantastic. Thank you for joining us here, and thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.